Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. I shot that video the other day, let you guys in on my life a little bit more, and told some ideas about plans for the channel, where this thing may go. And I had a wonderful conversation with a fella today, a fella named Paul, and I finished building an engine for him, and the storms and things that delayed his engine being shipped out and such. But I had a wonderful conversation with him about the content of the video. I've taken the time to review quite a few of the comments in there. Actually, I've reviewed every single comment from the video. And then I talked to several other people as well. David was another one. He picked up his bike, and, a handful of other guys about the video. And you guys, I can't thank all of you enough for your amazing and wonderful comments. Absolutely filled my heart. So thank you. So I think largely for all the input, some of course said, maybe you should do a separate channel to do things other than bike stuff. But then a lot of the feedback that I have, and I take great value in that, and I can see where that would come from. On the second side, a lot of the guys said, Kevin, people just want to see you build stuff sometimes. They just want to see how you build things. And that was supported by a lot of the comments that I saw. So I think I've made the decision that I will continue on with the Tales of a Parts Store Counterman, maybe telling some of my life stories, as well as building all sorts of different things. So that's where we're going to continue. So thanks for hanging in for a couple of minutes. This was a bit of a long intro. Hang around with me for a little bit. I want to tell you guys a story about one of the bravest men I think I've ever met in my life. And what made me think about it was me taking a few minutes to see if we could get the Model T running. So hang around for about 15 or 20 minutes if you want to hear an amazing story about a fella named Bill Bowers. It's almost 9 o'clock here. And so, my typical work day, I'll pretty much go all day. And then for the last, after, I'll grab something to eat, I eat dinner around, 4 o'clock. I start getting hungry because I don't eat breakfast or lunch. So then I have a really nice dinner around 4. And then I'll tinker again with other things, complete the projects I'd started for the day, continue forward, get ready for the next day. But always in the quietness, I always like to reserve a little bit of time at the end of the day, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or something like that, to work on something different, something just to clear my head, Often I don't sleep very much, and my brain is constantly working and thinking about things. So I find that physically doing things that challenge me is a bit, to some degree, my therapy. What reminded me to tell you this story was playing around with the Model T. And so I want to tell you the story of Bill Bowers. And what made me think about this is Bill Bowers would have been around when this 1927 Model T was around. And you don't have the opportunity to talk to people that old sometimes. Unfortunately, Mr. Bowers is no longer with us, but he was the single bravest man I think I've ever met. And I made a promise to Mr. Bowers when he and I had a conversation over 20 years ago. And I made a promise to him that I would share the story that he was kind enough to share with me every year on Memorial Day. And I just remembered that this year I forgot to tell his story to someone. And I feel horrible about that. First year in 20 that I didn't make good on my promise to Mr. Bowers. So I'm going to tell all of you the story. A little over 20 years ago, I was dating a girl, and her grandparents lived in a little town called Worthington, Ohio. And Worthington, I'd only been there once. The funny thing about it was her grandparents lived in Worthington there. They still lived in the same little brick shotgun-style house scattered all around Worthington. They still lived in the same house that they moved into together right after he returned from World War II. And it was typical for you guys that may be from that area. You know, they're really small, real narrow houses. Some of them maybe 1.5 story, if you want to call it that, with a detached garage and a small yard in the back. And they decided, the girl I was dating, her grandparents, to move to Georgia. And they had a car that they had to get relocated. And so I had my truck and a trailer. And, of course, I offered to drive to Worthington, Ohio, to haul that car back for them. And absolutely wonderful people. And Bill and, you know, his wife, Millicent, they're just amazing, amazing people. And it was the first night that we were there staying in their house that Bill was in the kitchen. And again, as I mentioned, sometimes I don't sleep too much. So I had gotten up just to kind of walk around the house a little bit and admire the china cabinets with the old, you know, green glass and blue glass things that you know, her grandmother had in them. And Bill was in the kitchen. And I walked into the kitchen, and I need to describe Bill to you first. He was a very, very small, frail guy. We have to remember how old he was at the time. He was in his 80s, I believe. His hands were crippled up like this, and his knuckles looked like walnuts, you know, and I would say he had a hunchback. I mean, you know, you see old guys that they walk around like this, but with their abdomen, you know, folded over, and that's how he walked around everywhere. And he was sitting at the table, and so I sat down with him. And on the counter, they had one of those old metal percolators, you know, a coffee percolator. And Bill he had his cup in his cup of coffee, and he would pour it in his saucer and just rub it with a spoon a little bit and then drink from the saucer. And that was his way of cooling the coffee down a little bit, and he'd drink from the saucer. But when he poured that coffee out of that percolator, it looked like black tar. It was amazing. So naturally, he offers me a cup, and we sat down and we just talk about a few things. Now, while we're sitting at his table, I hear a little bit of a noise on the screen outside, and, you know, this is in the middle of the night. I hear a noise on the screen window, and he gets up and he goes, "Oh, those must be my little friends." And when he stands up, again, he stood up and he's hunched over and he's having a difficult time standing, and of course I offered to help him stand, and he refused. Absolutely refused. So we went over to a little coffee can next to his back door in the kitchen. You have to remember, these kitchens, they're really, really tiny, you know, an old school metal table there in the kitchen. And he opens the can, and he had nuts inside the can. He poured a few into his hand, capped it back off, and he reaches over and he opens the screen door and held his hand down. And there were a couple of squirrels. And what was interested me is we don't have black squirrels down here in the South, but they were 2 little black squirrels. Kind of interesting. And they came and ate directly from his hand. And he put the rest of the peanuts on the porch and closed the door, wiped his hands off, you know, and he came back and he sat down. I was amazed by that. And we talked for a few more minutes, and I'm trying to drink this bitter tar-like coffee. And Bill looks at me out of nowhere. He had this just stone look on his face. He got very serious instantly. And his wife, Millicent, had warned me that Bill was entering the stages of, you know, Alzheimer's, and to expect him to maybe disconnect sometimes and say something a little crazy. And but I could tell something was tapping in his brain. The look on his face just changed. He leaned across the table and he looked at me and he said, "I have a story to tell you. I know I'm losing my mind, and I know I won't have it long, and I don't talk about these things very much, but I would like to tell you the story. But just do me a favor. Always remember the story I'm about to tell you. And when you have a chance to share it with someone." And I said, "Bill, I promise you I'll share it every year on Memorial Day." So Bill started to tell me the story of him in World War II. Come to find out, Bill Bowers was one of the first paratroopers to land in southern France during the Champagne campaign. He was a member of the Battling 517th, the Battling Buzzards, and I would like to encourage you guys to look that up. The Battling Buzzards, the 517th, and his name is Bill Bowers, if you would like to look him up. The interesting thing about that battle, they were dropped many, many miles away from the intended safe landing zone, and in fact, they were dropped well behind enemy lines, with Germany there. He began to tell me what that was like. Young man being thrown out of an airplane, parachuting into unknown territory, then realizing how far away they were from where they were supposed to be. Shortly into their hike back to their landing zone, he described he said wires that went through the trees. And what he explained to me is that what the Germans would do would string this wire through trees, and that's how they communicated. It was basically, phone lines for them. And part of their task was to pull those lines down and cut them so these people can't communicate. And when he told me about that, he winced a little. I knew there had to be more to the story. So he explained that they had a bit of an experience there when he reached up to grab that phone line, and he just said he was injured, but he pulled the phone line down, and then they continued. And then he said that there was another situation where they basically got held down in a foxhole. And I want Bill to talk. I could tell he wanted to share. And he said, and he would do like that when he would talk about it. And I said, Bill, are you okay? And he said, Kevin, there's a lot of things I don't remember, but there are some things that I do remember. And he said, what I remember is what a bullet sounds like when it's going past your head. And I said, what does it sound like, Bill? And with his knuckles and his hands like this, he reaches across the table to snap a finger in my ear. But his hands didn't quite work right. But he was trying to show me that that's what a bullet sounds like when it passes by your head. So I said, well, Bill, you mean like this? And I reached over and snapped my finger, and I watched him wince. And I realized what he was doing. In his mind, he's reliving what happened to him. He explained that they were able to walk several more miles and then actually made it to their safe zone, and then he was removed from the front line because of his injuries. And at this point, I began to understand the scope of Bill's bravery. So I asked him, Bill, you're kind of an old man, and I'm trying to lighten the mood a little bit. I said, you hunch over, things like that. And Bill also had a bit of a crooked smile. He'd talk out of one side of his mouth, just kind of a crooked smile. I had assumed maybe he'd had a stroke at some point or something. But so I asked Bill, I said, well, you said you got injured. What happened? Boys. Bill stood up, clambered up from the chair like this with his hands on the table. And he's wearing a flannel shirt that he buttoned all the way up here, flannel shirt. And he untucked his shirt and lifted his shirt. The man's entire abdomen, from his lower waist all across here, was a scar. Looked like he had been ran over by a train. Just scars, just like his skin, his flesh, just completely mangled. His rib cage was crooked. You could see it. He tucks his shirt back in, and he sat down. Then Bill began to weep, and he told me the rest of his story. The story is when he reached up in the woods there to grab that phone line and pull that phone line down, Bill was shot with a burp gun by one of the Germans. That gun ripped his abdomen open, and his intestines were exposed. In addition to that, he was hit in the jaw, and it almost ripped his jaw off. As he explained, it was only kind of held together by his own tissue. Right after that happened, several of the troops, many of the men died. But the ones that were left, they grabbed belts, ropes, anything that they could find, and put helmets across his abdomen, 2 or 3 helmets to try to hold his innards against him. And they tied him tightly against. And then they fashioned, one took their shirt off and wrapped it around his jaw and around his head to hold his jaw in place. Bill went on to fight and walk. 15 miles, I believe it was, in total through the jungle. In addition to that injury, when they got stuck in that foxhole, under fire, heavy artillery, Bill said he just got tired of waiting. And he had this term he called a quick goose trick, I think is what he called it, quick goose trick. And what he had learned early on, using the weapons they had was, you make several shots, pop, 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 and then you have the pause to reload. Pop, 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 pause to reload. And he sat there and he basically waited for the fire line coming at them to pause, to reload. But what he would always do is make a few shots, save one, clip. Make a few shots, save another one, combine them together again. And if they were smart enough to be counting, in his mind, he's counting some that they're not. So while under fire, Bill jumps up between their pauses of reloading and eliminated those that were firing on them, 5 to 7 Germans, as I understand. The story tells basically the same. There was a book about the battling buzzards. And so after that happened, Bill continued to walk and was able to get to the landing zone. And he obviously did survive his injuries. And as a result of his bravery, of course, Purple Heart, he was also given a Silver Star with 2, I believe, a bronze oak leaf cluster and several other medals as a result of his bravery. And I got to hear this wonderful story about Bill. Well, then, of course, we moved the car back down here, and me and that girl, we didn't work out. But I was able to stay in touch with Bill for quite a number of years. And after a few years, of course, with the Alzheimer's, he continued to get worse and worse and worse, to the point that his mind was completely gone. And one day, I had the opportunity to talk to his wife, Millicent, because I was always wondering why Bill chose to share that story with me. And Millicent said that Bill had always wanted to tell the whole story of what happened to him while he was there. He didn't want to tell anyone because he didn't want to seem prideful. But at the same time, he said he wasn't a hero. He was just doing what he felt he needed to do. And she said he chose me because he felt like I would never forget it. And I'm blessed to have been told that story. And Bill Bowers, the Battling Buzzards, the 517th, he passed right at 11 years ago. Quite a fellow. And I look at today's world, I look at the things that are going on. You have men like that did things like that. We look at the countless others that made similar sacrifices, many who didn't make it home. We look at the upcoming election, and I'm not going to get political, but I would say, in short, we need to pay a lot less attention to the things that don't seem to matter as much. A very brilliant man said, judge by the content of character, not the color of skin. We should worry less about skin color. We should celebrate our differences. We should worry less about the things that, in part, really just don't matter. And we should learn to be kind, learn to be brave, learn to be humble. We could all learn a lesson from Mr. Bill Bowers. And the oddity of it is, Bill was around when this car was around. Ain't that something? All right, so in honor of Mr. Bowers, let's see if we can hand crank this old girl. Not too bad. That thing ain't running 40 years. Did a little tinkering. Maybe that'll be for another video. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other. Next video, we're talking motorcycle stuff. Have a good one.